how opposed are the illusion of the self and a state of flow? I've perceived that a state of flow requires eliminating all thoughts of I am not embedded in the environment.
Yeah. Flow states are kind of wonderful. And I think that we underestimate their pervasiveness. That is, we tend to focus, and this is just largely because of partly experimental data and partly because of the way that this has been valorized in areas like sports psychology and so forth. We tend to valorize extraordinary cases, like when we're playing a sport or when we're playing a musical instrument, areas of obvious expertise. But in those moments of real virtuoso performance, of real expert performance, it is certainly true that we lose that sense of subject-object duality, of being distinct from the world, and feel ourselves completely embedded and no longer subjectivize ourselves and objectivize the things around us. And those are wonderful experiences. But I think that people forget that there's a kind of underlying flow state that we enter almost all of the time. For instance, when we're walking, we're not saying, oh, there's me and my steps and me and the ground below me, unless we're really in trouble. I mean, that is, unless we're recovering from an injury or something like that, and we're no longer expert walkers. When I've been talking to you for the last 35 minutes or so, I haven't been experiencing me, Jay, and you, Alex, and the microphone and the computer. I've just been talking. And so I've been in a kind of flow state with respect to that, regardless of what else I might have been objectifying at the moment. And so this is one way of saying that there's a kind of primordially non-dual consciousness to which we have access and that underlies a lot of our expert performance, even when we're not aware that we're engaged in expert performance all the time, because there's a lot that we're expert at. If we're engaged in a deep conversation with a friend, we're very good at that. And we're not thematizing subject-object duality so much then. We might suddenly stand back and say, something has gone wrong, and then we do the objectification. But I think that Martin Heidegger was right when he says in Being in Time, or Sein und Zeit, that objects come to be present to hand. That is, we come to have a dualistic awareness from them when there's a moment of breakdown, when things aren't working as they should. When they are working as they should, things are simply available to us. They become part of the world in which we live. And so I think that while it's really important to understand those very special moments of superflow when we're just engaged in an activity that completely absorbs us, that we should also come to use those experiences as ways of recognizing that pervasive flow that underlies a lot of our experience.
In relationship to your analogy of being able to walk and how it is precisely when you cannot walk that you stop being in a state of flow. David Dodge, in his book, The Beginning of Infinity, he's got a great analogy about this. He says that when you are using a telescope and you are observing stars, if the telescope is not perfectly adjusted, you stop perceiving the stars and you start perceiving the telescope.
Precisely. The perfect analogy, one that I like to use all the time, because once we recognize that our senses are also measuring instruments, we recognize that we don't notice our eyes when we're seeing the world unless things get blurry. We don't notice our ears when we're seeing the world unless we get tinnitus or something like that. And that's absolutely right. Things emerge as objects for us when they break down. And I would add to that, when I'm, say, working on a paper and I'm typing on the computer, I don't notice my fingers unless they start to hurt. I don't notice the keyboard unless a key starts sticking or something like that. Those things as well simply become part of my interface with the world and not distinguished from me as objects to a subject. Once they break down, suddenly I become aware as subject of my fingers as object. Once my keyboard breaks, suddenly it becomes an object that I notice and not the thing through which I'm speaking.
So there must be something broken down in our minds so that we perceive the self to be existing.
All the time. Yep, I think that's right. And it's the pervasiveness of that self-illusion that underlies the Buddha's observation in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, discourse Turning the Wheel of Dharma, his very first teaching, that our world is pervaded by suffering. And it's because of that pervasive delusion that reflects a pervasive breakdown. And as you pointed out earlier, that's a breakdown that we've evolved for.